I need you to hear me before you try to fix anything, before you set another goal, before you write another list, before you tell yourself this year will be different. Because if you rebuild a future on a foundation that is still cracked by last year's pain, you will keep wondering why the walls won't stand. Some of you walked into this new year smiling on the outside and silently exhausted on the inside. You survived what should have broken you, but surviving is not the same as being whole. You don't need a new personality. You don't need a new anointing. You don't need permission to become someone else. You need the courage to rebuild yourself from the inside out. Not the version that people applauded, not the version that learned how to cope, but the version that remembers who you were before life told you to shrink, to settle, to stay silent. This is not about erasing your past. This is about reclaiming your power, your voice, and your faith in the same breath. And if you're brave enough to admit that some parts of you didn't make it through last year intact, then you're ready for the kind of rebuilding that doesn't just change your calendar, it changes your capacity. There is a moment that happens quietly inside of us when we realize that holding on is costing us more than letting go ever could. It's not loud. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with fatigue, with that deep tiredness that sleep can't fix because it's not your body that's exhausted, it's your soul. You've been carrying versions of yourself that were only meant to get you through a season. But you kept them because they once worked. You kept the survival mindset. You kept the emotional armor. You kept the silence that protected you when speaking up felt dangerous, but what saved you then is now suffocating you. And rebuilding yourself begins with the courage to admit that some things expired, even though they were once necessary. Release is not weakness. Release is wisdom. It is recognizing that you cannot build with cluttered hands. You cannot rebuild while gripping old disappointments, old labels, old expectations, and old guilt. Some of you are trying to construct a new future while still defending an old version of yourself that God already graduated. You keep rehearsing who you used to be because it feels familiar, but familiar does not mean faithful to who you are becoming. And the hardest part about release is that sometimes what you have to let go of isn't painful, it's comfortable. It's the identity that fit the room. It's the role that earned approval. It's the strength that never asked for help. And letting go of that feels like losing yourself, when in reality, it's the first step to finding yourself again. Rebuilding yourself requires an honest audit. Not the kind where you shame yourself for what didn't work, but the kind where you lovingly assess what can no longer come with you. Some of you learned how to be strong because nobody showed up when you needed support. That strength kept you alive, but now it's keeping you isolated. Some of you learned how to stay quiet because your voice was dismissed or misunderstood. That silence kept you safe, but now it's keeping you invisible. Some of you learned how to keep going without processing anything because stopping felt like falling apart. That endurance kept you moving, but now it's keeping you unhealed. And the new version of you cannot be built on coping mechanisms that were never meant to be permanent. You don't rebuild by pretending the damage didn't happen. You rebuild by acknowledging where the cracks formed and choosing not to live there anymore. You stop blaming yourself for what you didn't know when you didn't know it. You stop punishing yourself for choices you made while you were just trying to survive. You give yourself permission to outgrow the version of you that did the best they could with what they had. And that permission is not something anyone else can grant you, not your family, not your friends, not your critics. It has to come from the part of you that is tired of being loyal to what hurts you. There's grief in rebuilding, and we don't talk about that enough. Because when you release what was, you also release the dreams attached to it. The timelines you expected, the outcomes you prayed for, the relationships you thought would last forever. And it's okay to mourn what didn't make it. It's okay to acknowledge that you're disappointed, even if you're still grateful. Gratitude does not cancel grief. Faith does not erase loss. You can believe God for more and still be honest about what broke your heart. Rebuilding yourself means allowing space for both truth and hope to exist in the same room. Some of you keep rushing the process because you're afraid of what you'll feel if you slow down. But you cannot heal what you refuse to feel. You cannot rebuild on top of unaddressed pain and expect stability. What you avoid will eventually demand your attention, usually at the most inconvenient time. So instead of running from your emotions, you sit with them long enough to understand what they're trying to teach you. Pain is not your enemy. Unprocessed pain is. And when you give yourself permission to feel without judgment, you begin to loosen the grip that the past has on your present. Rebuilding yourself also means redefining your worth, because some of you measured your value by how much you endured, how much you produced, how much you gave, how little you needed. You learned to equate being needed with being loved. You learned to equate exhaustion with purpose. And now you're realizing that you were praised for being strong while quietly being neglected. The new version of you does not need to earn rest. The new version of you does not need to perform to be accepted. The new version of you understands that worth is not something you prove, it's something you protect. There will be moments in this rebuilding season where you feel like you're falling behind because you're no longer moving at the pace you used to. But what looks like slowing down is actually alignment. You're no longer driven by fear. You're no longer motivated by comparison. You're no longer chasing validation. You're making intentional choices instead of reactive ones. And that shift can feel uncomfortable when you're used to chaos being your normal. Peace can feel boring to a nervous system that's been trained to survive in stress. But boredom is not the enemy, burnout is. You are not starting from scratch. You are starting from experience, from wisdom, from lessons you paid for with tears and prayers and nights you didn't think you'd make it through. And that means this rebuilding process is not about becoming someone unrecognizable. It's about becoming more honest, more grounded, more aware. You're not erasing your story. You're editing the parts that no longer align with who you are now. And editing requires intention. It requires courage to say, this chapter shaped me, but it does not get to define the rest of the book. Some people will struggle with your rebuilding because the old version of you benefited them. They knew how to access you when you had no boundaries. They knew how to predict you when you operated from guilt. They knew how to keep you small when you didn't believe you deserved more. And as you release what was, you may feel the tension of disappointing others. But disappointing others is sometimes the cost of being honest with yourself. You cannot rebuild your life around the comfort of people who refuse to respect your growth. This season is asking you to trust the quiet work, the unseen work, the internal shifts that don't get applause but change everything. It's asking you to be patient with yourself as you unlearn patterns that took years to form. It's asking you to stop rushing your healing because you're eager to prove that you're okay. You don't have to prove anything. You don't owe anyone a polished version of your progress. Rebuilding is messy. It's nonlinear. Some days you'll feel strong and clear. Other days you'll feel unsure and emotional. Both days count. When you release what was, you make room for discernment. You stop saying yes out of obligation and start saying yes out of alignment. You stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop opening doors God already closed because loneliness convinced you that access was better than peace. You begin to recognize that not everything you lost was a loss. Some things left so you could finally breathe. Some things fell apart so you could finally see what you were holding together alone. Rebuilding yourself is not about rushing into the next thing. It's about stabilizing who you are so that when the next opportunity comes, you don't sabotage it with unhealed wounds. It's about learning how to sit with yourself without distraction and not feel the need to escape. It's about trusting that you are allowed to evolve without announcing it to everyone. Growth does not need an audience. Sometimes it needs privacy. You are allowed to rebuild slowly. You are allowed to change your mind. You are allowed to take up space differently than you used to. You are allowed to rest without feeling guilty. You are allowed to want more without feeling ungrateful. And as you continue to release what was, you'll notice something powerful happening. Your shoulders will relax, your breath will deepen, your decisions will become clearer. Because when you stop carrying the weight of who you used to be, you finally have the capacity to become who you were always meant to be. And in this space where the old no longer defines you and the new is still being formed, you begin to recognize that rebuilding yourself is not about fixing something broken. It is about honoring the strength it took to survive and choosing to build a life that no longer requires you to be in survival mode every single day while learning how to trust yourself again, even when the process feels unfamiliar and the outcomes are not yet visible. But something inside you knows that this time you are not rebuilding out of desperation, but out of alignment. And that changes the way you move, the way you choose, the way you speak to yourself when things don't go as planned, because you are no longer trying to get back to who you were. You are allowing yourself to become who you are still unfolding into. And that unfolding does not need to be rushed or explained or perfected before you honor it. Because becoming is not a destination, it is a daily decision to show up honestly, release gently, and rebuild with intention, even when the blueprint is still forming and the path ahead requires faith. You are still learning how to practice in real time. Some of you have been praised for your productivity while your pain went completely unnoticed. You learned how to keep moving because stopping felt dangerous. You learned how to stay busy because stillness would force you to feel what you've been avoiding. And somewhere along the way, hustle became your hiding place. You told yourself you were being disciplined, focused, driven, when in reality you were exhausted, overwhelmed, and emotionally unattended. Healing before you hustle is not about slowing your ambition. It's about stabilizing your foundation so that what you build doesn't collapse under the weight of unhealed wounds. We live in a world that celebrates results but rarely asks about the cost. You are applauded for how much you can carry, how much you can juggle, how much you can accomplish without breaking, but nobody asks what you're suppressing to keep going. Nobody asks how many emotions you swallowed to meet a deadline. Nobody asks how many boundaries you crossed with yourself just to prove that you could. And when you don't heal, you don't just carry pain, you distribute it into your decisions, your relationships, your leadership, your dreams. Unhealed pain has a way of disguising itself as motivation. You think you're chasing purpose, but you're really running from emptiness. You think you're ambitious, but you're really afraid of being still. You think you're driven, but you're actually trying to outrun disappointment. And hustle becomes a way to feel valuable without having to feel vulnerable. But the problem with building from a wounded place is that eventually your wounds start leading instead of your wisdom. Healing requires honesty, and honesty is uncomfortable when you've spent years pretending you were fine. It requires you to admit that some of your strength was survival, not sustainability. That some of your discipline was actually fear. That some of your independence was built because you didn't feel safe relying on anyone, and there is no shame in that. You did what you had to do to make it through. But what got you through is not always what will take you forward. You cannot rush healing because healing is not linear. It doesn't follow your calendar. It doesn't respond to pressure. You can't schedule grief. You can't productivity plan forgiveness. You can't checklist your way through emotional restoration. Healing happens when you allow yourself to feel without judgment, to rest without guilt, to acknowledge hurt without minimizing it. And that kind of work takes time, patience, and compassion for yourself. Some of you are trying to build businesses, ministries, careers, relationships while your inner world is in chaos. And you wonder why you feel disconnected from the very things you prayed for. You wonder why success doesn't feel satisfying. You wonder why every win is followed by exhaustion instead of joy. It's because healing was skipped. You built momentum, but not maturity. You gained influence, but not inner peace. And eventually the gap between who you appear to be and who you feel like becomes unbearable. Healing before you hustle means you stop using achievement to validate your worth. You stop letting numbers define your identity. You stop measuring your value by how useful you are to other people, because when your worth is tied to performance, rest feels like failure. And when rest feels like failure, burnout becomes inevitable. Healing teaches you that you are worthy even when you are still, even when you are uncertain, even when you are not producing anything at all. There are wounds that don't scream, they whisper. They show up as impatience, as defensiveness, as overworking, as emotional numbness, as control issues, as perfectionism. And if you don't pause long enough to listen, you'll keep reacting instead of responding. You'll keep repeating patterns and calling them seasons. You'll keep attracting the same situations and wondering why nothing changes. Healing interrupts cycles that hustle only reinforces. Some of you are afraid to heal because you don't know who you'll be without the pain pushing you. You don't know what will drive you if you're no longer trying to prove something. You don't know what your identity looks like without struggle attached to it. But pain is not supposed to be your fuel. Survival is not meant to be your personality. You are allowed to be motivated by joy. You are allowed to be inspired by peace. You are allowed to build from wholeness instead of wounds. Healing before you hustle also means you stop glamorizing exhaustion. You stop wearing burnout like a badge of honor. You stop equating being overwhelmed with being important, because exhaustion does not equal effectiveness. Being tired all the time is not a sign of purpose, it's a sign of imbalance. And ignoring your limits does not make you strong, it makes you fragile. Strong people know when to pause. Strong people know when to ask for help. Strong people know when to say no. There are conversations you keep avoiding because they make you uncomfortable. Emotions you keep suppressing because they feel inconvenient. Memories you keep burying because they hurt too much to revisit. But buried pain doesn't disappear. It leaks. It leaks into how you love. It leaks into how you lead. It leaks into how you see yourself. Healing asks you to bring what's hidden into the light, not to shame it, but to free it from control over you. Some of you learned to hustle because rest was never modeled for you. You saw people survive, not thrive. You saw exhaustion normalized. You saw sacrifice praised without boundaries. And you internalized the belief that slowing down meant falling behind. But healing teaches you that rest is not the opposite of progress. Rest is part of progress. Rest is part of growth. Stillness is part of clarity. And when you give yourself permission to pause, you create space to hear yourself think again. Healing is not about blaming the past. It's about understanding it. It's about recognizing how certain experiences shaped your responses and deciding whether those responses still serve you. It's about noticing when you're reacting from old wounds instead of present reality. And that awareness changes everything. Because once you see the pattern, you can interrupt it. Once you understand the trigger, you can choose differently. You don't need to be fully healed to move forward, but you do need to be self-aware. You do need to be honest about where you're still tender. You do need to stop pretending that ignoring pain is the same as overcoming it. Healing is layered. It unfolds as you go. But when you make healing a priority instead of an afterthought, you build resilience, not just momentum. Some of you are chasing the next thing because you think it will finally make you feel whole, the next opportunity, the next relationship, the next accomplishment. But wholeness does not come from external achievements. It comes from internal alignment. And if you don't heal first, You'll keep arriving at destinations that don't satisfy you. You'll keep upgrading your surroundings while neglecting your inner life. Healing before you hustle also protects the people connected to your future, because unhealed leaders create unsafe environments. Unhealed dreamers build unstable systems. Unhealed hearts unintentionally wound others. When you heal, you don't just change your life, you change how you show up for everyone connected to you. You become more patient, more present, more grounded, more discerning. There is courage in slowing down when the world tells you to speed up. There is bravery in choosing therapy over pretending. There is strength in saying, I need help. There is wisdom in acknowledging that you cannot pour from an empty place. Healing requires you to challenge narratives you were taught about toughness and success. It asks you to redefine what it means to be strong. You may feel behind because you're taking time to heal, but you're actually preparing yourself to go further without breaking. You're learning how to build with intention instead of urgency. You're learning how to listen to your body instead of overriding it. You're learning how to trust yourself instead of constantly seeking external validation. And those lessons will save you years of unnecessary struggle. Healing is not passive. It is active, intentional work. It's choosing to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it. It's choosing to set boundaries even when it feels awkward. It's choosing to confront patterns instead of blaming circumstances. And that work is just as important as any goal you're chasing, because goals achieved without healing often create new problems instead of solutions. Some of you are afraid that if you slow down, everything will fall apart. But what if slowing down is the very thing that holds everything together? What if rest gives you clarity you've been missing? What if healing reveals desires that were buried under pressure? What if peace becomes your new motivation instead of proving something to people who never took the time to understand you? Healing before you hustle means you stop running on empty and start moving with intention. It means you stop chasing external validation and start cultivating internal stability. It means you stop ignoring warning signs and start honoring your limits. And as you begin to prioritize healing, you'll notice that your hustle changes. It becomes calmer, more focused, more aligned, less frantic, less reactive. You won't move as fast, but you'll move with purpose. You won't do as much, but what you do will matter more. You won't say yes to everything, but the things you commit to will receive your full presence. And that shift may feel uncomfortable at first because you're used to chaos being normal. But over time, peace becomes familiar, balance becomes attractive, and you begin to realize that healing was never a detour, it was the preparation. Some of you are discovering that you don't need to be fixed, you need to be heard. You don't need to be pushed harder, you need to be supported. You don't need more pressure, you need more compassion. And as you give yourself that compassion, you start to rebuild trust with yourself. You stop abandoning your needs for approval. You stop ignoring your intuition for productivity. You stop betraying yourself just to keep up. Healing changes the way you dream. Your dreams become healthier. Your goals become more sustainable. Your vision becomes clearer. You stop chasing things that look good but feel wrong. You stop forcing doors that require you to shrink to fit. You start choosing paths that align with your values, not just your ego. Healing is not a sign that you're weak. It's a sign that you're self-aware. It's a sign that you care enough about your future to address your past. It's a sign that you're committed to growth that lasts, not just success that looks good. And when healing becomes part of your process, hustle stops being about escape and starts being about expression. You don't have to rush this. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to compete with anyone else's timeline. This is your journey, your pace, your process. And as you continue to choose healing before hustle, you begin to notice that you're no longer building from pressure, but from peace. No longer driven by fear, but guided by clarity. No longer motivated by survival, but inspired by wholeness. And that internal shift begins to influence how you wake up, how you speak to yourself, how you respond to challenges, how you define progress, how you recognize when it's time to push and when it's time to pause. How you trust your instincts again, how you allow rest to coexist with ambition, how you give yourself grace on the days when healing feels heavy and growth feels slow, how you learn that becoming whole is not about arriving at a perfect version of yourself, but about staying present in the process of listening, adjusting, releasing, and rebuilding from a place that finally feels safe enough to be honest about what you need and what you're still learning to let go of. Some of you have been living inside a definition of success that you never consciously chose. You inherited it. You absorbed it. You adapted to it because it was rewarded, because it was applauded, because it made other people comfortable. Somewhere along the way, success stopped being about fulfillment and started being about approval. It became about appearances, about timelines, about comparison, about checking boxes that somebody else created and then wondering why you still felt empty after you checked them all. Redefining success on your terms is one of the most disruptive and liberating things you will ever do, because it forces you to confront the truth that not everything you chased was actually meant for you. We don't talk enough about how success can become a trap, how you can achieve everything you were told to want and still feel disconnected from yourself, how you can climb ladders only to realize they're leaning against walls you don't even care about, how you can win in public and lose in private. And the danger is not success itself, it's pursuing it without self-awareness. It's building a life that looks good from the outside but feels heavy on the inside. It's mistaking movement for meaning and noise for impact. Redefining success requires you to slow down long enough to ask yourself hard questions. Questions like, why do I want this? Who am I trying to impress? What am I afraid will happen if I don't achieve this? What am I sacrificing to maintain this image? And those questions can be uncomfortable because they expose motivations you didn't even realize were driving you. They reveal when fear, insecurity, or comparison has been in the driver's seat instead of purpose. Some of you have been chasing success as a way to heal wounds it was never designed to touch. You thought accomplishment would silence insecurity. You thought recognition would heal rejection. You thought achievement would finally make you feel enough. But success is a terrible substitute for self-worth. It can distract you for a while, but it will never fill what only healing and self-acceptance can address. And when you redefine success, you stop asking what will make me look accomplished and start asking what will make me feel aligned. Alignment doesn't always look impressive. Sometimes it looks like turning down opportunities that don't match your values. Sometimes it looks like choosing peace over prestige. Sometimes it looks like changing directions, even when people don't understand why. And that can be terrifying when you're used to external validation guiding your choices. Because when you redefine success, you accept that some people will misunderstand you. Some people will think you're settling. Some people will think you're wasting potential. But potential that costs you your peace is not purpose. It's pressure. You've been taught to measure success by speed, by how fast you achieve milestones, by how quickly you recover from setbacks, by how soon you get back on your feet. But speed without sustainability leads to burnout. Healing taught you to slow down. Now redefining success teaches you to stay grounded. It reminds you that longevity matters more than momentum, that consistency matters more than intensity, that finishing whole matters more than starting strong. Some of you feel guilty for wanting something different than what you prayed for years ago. But growth changes desires. Healing reshapes priorities. And you are allowed to want something new without betraying who you used to be. Redefining success gives you permission to evolve without explaining yourself. It allows you to honor past dreams while still making room for new ones. It allows you to say that season was meaningful and this season requires something else. When success is defined by others, rest feels irresponsible. Boundaries feel selfish. Saying no feels like failure. But when you define success for yourself, rest becomes strategic. Boundaries become necessary. Saying no becomes an act of self-respect. You stop seeing yourself as a machine designed to produce and start seeing yourself as a human designed to live fully. And that shift changes everything about how you move through your day. Some of you have been successful at things that drained you because you didn't think you had permission to walk away. You thought quitting meant weakness. You thought changing your mind meant inconsistency. But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that something no longer fits. Redefining success teaches you that finishing everything you start is not a virtue if what you started is costing you your health, your joy, or your integrity. There is also grief in redefining success because you realize how much time you spent chasing the wrong things, how many decisions were driven by fear instead of clarity, how many moments you missed because you were too busy trying to prove something, and that grief is valid. You don't rush past it. You let it inform you, not imprison you. You let it sharpen your discernment so you don't repeat the same patterns. Success on your terms considers your whole life, not just one area. It asks, how is my mental health? How are my relationships? How is my sense of purpose? How is my peace? And if one area is thriving while everything else is falling apart, that's not success, that's imbalance. You are not meant to be impressive and miserable. You are not meant to be accomplished and disconnected. You are not meant to win at the expense of your well-being. Comparison makes redefining success harder because it constantly shifts the goalposts. There will always be someone doing more, earning more, achieving faster. And if you let comparison define your standards, you will never feel satisfied. Redefining success means opting out of competitions you were never meant to run. It means recognizing that someone else's path has nothing to do with your assignment. It means measuring progress by faithfulness, not fame. Some of you are realizing that your definition of success was shaped by trauma, by scarcity, by environments where you had to overachieve to be noticed. And that awareness is powerful because it allows you to separate your true desires from your survival strategies. You stop chasing things just because they make you feel safe. You start choosing things because they make you feel alive. Redefining success also impacts how you celebrate. You stop waiting for big milestones to acknowledge progress. You start honoring small wins. Emotional growth, healthier boundaries, better decisions, increased self-awareness. You begin to seek success in choosing rest over working, honesty over image, alignment over applause. And those victories may not trend online, but they change your life. Some of you have been afraid to redefine success because you think it means shrinking your dreams. But it's not about shrinking, it's about refining. It's about making sure your dreams include you, include your health, include your relationships, include your peace. It's about dreaming in a way that doesn't require you to abandon yourself to achieve it. When you redefine success, failure changes too. Failure no longer means you're behind. It becomes information, feedback, redirection. You stop attaching your identity to outcomes and start anchoring it in values. You become more resilient because your sense of worth is no longer tied to constant winning. You understand that setbacks don't erase progress, they refine it. There is also freedom in admitting that success looks different in different seasons. Sometimes success is expansion, sometimes it's maintenance, sometimes it's recovery, sometimes it's rest. And all of those seasons are valid. Redefining success gives you permission to honor the season you're in instead of shaming yourself for not being in another one. Some of you have been measuring success by how much you can endure, how much pressure you can tolerate, how much pain you can push through. But endurance without joy is not success, it's survival. And you didn't heal just to keep surviving. You healed to live, to feel, to enjoy, to build a life that doesn't require you to constantly override your needs. Redefining success also changes how you view money, influence, and recognition. They become tools, not trophies. They become resources, not identities. You stop chasing them for validation and start using them with intention. And that shift protects you from the emptiness that comes from having everything you thought you wanted, but nothing you actually needed. Some of you are learning that success is waking up without dread, that it's having energy for the people you love, that it's being able to